Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this Wednesday's edition of our weekly class series. Today's topic is alternatives to turf. Our speaker today is Natalie Walker. She's the environmental educator here at the Prince William Office of Virginia Cooperative Extension.
Good morning, everybody. Like Thomas said, my name is Natalie Walker, and I'm the environmental educator at Virginia Cooperative Extension, Prince William County. So some of the reasons to consider turf alternatives: you may have wet areas in your yard or areas that are in heavy shade or on a slope that can be difficult and dangerous to mow or maintain. If your lawn is unused, you may have a turf monoculture, which is an environment that offers little to no benefit to birds and other wildlife. You may have all lawn and realize that you want to attract more beneficial wildlife. Where we live in Northern Virginia, we're actually in a transitional zone, so we experience hot summers and cold winters. So we can grow turf, but not necessarily well given the environmental extremes. You may be just tired of mowing. It's really time consuming and labor intensive. You want less noise and air pollution from mowers. And the less lawn you have equals the less chemical inputs of fertilizers and pesticides, which actually leads to less chemicals getting into our waterways. And this in turn will help protect the health of the Chesapeake Bay. This picture shows turf grass on the left versus roots of native plants. So by having a variety of turf grass and native plants, there'll be deeper roots, which can help absorb during a heavy rainstorm and prevent runoff. Lawns can include other plants besides turf grasses. If you're looking to enhance the beauty, add texture, increase ecological diversity, and attract pollinators, you can incorporate trees, shrubs, edibles, and flowers, and planting natives when possible. So this picture shows the before and after. So just the before is just lawn, and then after they've added a lot of plants for diversity. All right, so the first alternative we'll start with is white Dutch clover and micro clover. A few facts about clover: it's in the legume family. There's different varieties. There's small, which are mini or micro, intermediate and large varieties, and they're native to Europe and Central Asia. There are many pros to white Dutch clover. This includes attracting pollinators. It actually reduces nitrogen fertilizer needs by half. It grows in shade and can provide green cover where grass doesn't grow well. It can add diversity to the lawns, enriches soil, and can be included in a tall fescue lawn. There are some cons to white Dutch clover. This includes your HOA might not allow it. An all clover lawn can equal a clover monoculture. Many people consider white clover a weed. It may not be aesthetically pleasing to some homeowners who are used to having an all grass lawn, and it may not provide a uniform look in turf grass. Next, we'll talk about micro clover. It's actually a selection of traditional white Dutch clover, but has smaller leaves and lower growth habit. Like I said before, there's micro clover and tall fescue mix. There's a lot of pros with this mix. The flowers can provide a food source for bees. The micro clover mixes well with tall fescue and also Kentucky bluegrass and provides a uniform appearance. They also have smaller leaves and fewer flowers and lower growth habit compared to white clover.
Micro clover.
And this picture shows a tall fescue micro clover mix. There are some cons to micro clover and tall fescue mix, which include the seeds can be expensive, and if you go to a retail store, they might not be readily available. It doesn't tolerate drought and high heat. It has poor shade tolerance, so especially under trees or heavy shade. And broadleaf herbicides labeled for tall fescue can kill the microclover that's in the lawn. All right, our next alternative that we'll be talking about is moss. There are thousands of moss species worldwide, and moss favors compaction, shade, and wet, poorly drained, humus-rich soil. And there is a publication, a Virginia Tech publication, that's really interesting. It's titled Lawn Moss Friend or Foe. So if anyone's interested in that, if you just do a Google search for the title, it'll come up. Some of the pros for moss: you don't have to mow it. It's natural erosion control. No fertilizers needed. It's good for cool, shady areas in lawn where grass may not grow well. Moss thrives in areas that exhibit good air and water quality, and it's great at retaining moisture and nutrients in the soil. Some of the cons of moss: it's not the best fit for areas with lots of foot traffic. Some people may consider it a weed. It also might not be aesthetically pleasing. The absence of turf allows the moss to expand, and it can show up in driveways, sidewalks, and the lawn. The next alternative we'll be talking about is ground covers. They spread, but they're low growing and don't grow tall, so little maintenance and no mowing necessary. Can add beauty to the landscape. There are lots of varieties, including native ground covers, and it helps prevent soil erosion. And Nancy Berlin, the natural resource specialist, did a presentation on ground covers, which is on our Virginia Cooperative Extension YouTube page. And this picture shows green and gold, which is a native ground cover. This is just a list of evergreen ground covers with the common name, light requirements, is it native or not native, and just general information about each ground cover. These are deciduous ground covers, again with a common name, is it native or not, and some general information about the plants. Something to pay attention to with ground covers is they can be invasive and you want to avoid them. So bugleweed, it can grow extremely rapidly, and it has an extensive root system. So these are just some of the common names of the plant that you might want to keep an eye out on. All right, some more ground covers. This is a Christmas fern. It is native, and it prefers part to full shade. Another native ground cover is the foam flower, and it prefers part to full shade, and it's a beautiful flower. Golden ragwort is a native, and it prefers sun, part shade, and shade. And the three natives I just showed you were on the previous list I showed you. So I got this list from a really great website called plantnovanatives.org. So on the left side, there's plants that mix in with grasses. And then the plants on the right displace grass. And again, I got that at plantnovanatives.org. So creeping speedwell, it's non-native, prefers full to partial sun, and there's blue flowers in the spring. Bugleweed, this is the one that grows extremely rapidly and can invade nearby areas. It's non-native and it prefers shade, but can be used as a ground cover. This is plumbago. It prefers full to partial sun. It's non-native, but it can be used as a ground cover. The next alternative are sedges, which are grass-like plants with a triangular stem. Pennsylvania sedge is a native and it prefers part to full shade. Big leaf sedge is native and it prefers part to full shade. Some of the pros to sedges: they're excellent ground covers, they feed and shelter wildlife, they can suppress weeds, and there are many native species to this area. Some cons of sedges: HOAs might not allow them, they might not be aesthetically pleasing to homeowner, and the uneven surface, there might be an uneven surface for entertaining or activities. This sedge list I got from watermarkwoods.com, and they just have a list of native sedges to Virginia. The next alternative is to add more trees into your landscape. So by incorporating more trees into the landscape, more specifically native trees, they provide a great ecological service, and they're the primary source for baby birds. And this picture on the right I got from Plant Nova Natives as well. And it shows you some information about shade trees, short trees, and specimen trees. And this is a willow oak. A tree benefit calculator that you can visit, which helps you understand the environmental and economic value of trees. And that was also on plantnovanatives.org. Another alternative to turf grass would be adding shrubs, which are small woody plants. If you don't have a huge yard, this can be a great option, and they provide food and habitat for birds. So just a few examples, there's northern spice bush on the bottom left, the button bush, which I absolutely love. I have experience with that one. I have seen lots of butterflies on it. That one prefers full sun to part shade. And then there's also witch hazel. So all these have really great benefits for animals. Another turf alternative is edible landscaping. So if you're looking to remove a portion of your turf, you can incorporate a vegetable or herb garden. You can grow and eat your own food while also adding a nice touch to the landscape. Another alternative to turf grass are rain gardens. This allows water from roof, downspouts, driveways, and asphalt to soak into the ground rather than going to the storm sewer system. Another alternative to turf grass are dry creek beds or dry stream beds. They're usually lined with stones and edged with plants to mimic a natural riparian area. It may help with drainage, which will prevent erosion by reducing runoff. Another alternative to turf are permeable landscapes. If there's an area in your lawn that is exposed, or there's a lot of foot traffic and you just can't grow anything there, you might want to consider something that's permeable. So that way when it rains, it doesn't just run off. It'll actually penetrate into the permeable hardscape, and the water will infiltrate through that hardscape. Another alternative is a meadow. You might have a large unused area, and if it receives 6 hours of sunlight, this might be a good alternative. Meadows are great because they enhance biodiversity. They're nesting sites for birds, butterflies, beneficial insects, and pollinators. And Nancy Berlin, the natural resource specialist, also did a YouTube video on planning now for a fall meadow, which is on our YouTube page. And this meadow in the picture isn't too far away from us. It's at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Maryland. It was an unused lawn, which was converted to a native meadow. You might consider turning your lawn area into a wooded area, which can improve habitat for wildlife, water quality, and provide privacy and solitude. Another alternative is a composting pile or composting area. You might be interested in composting, so any lawn that's unused, you could use that as a composting pile while reducing your lawn. Another alternative is called hugelkultur. It works by burying woody materials such as logs, branches, and twigs under soil, and then growing plants on top of the buried mound. The wood in the hugelkultur soaks up the water like a sponge, and it provides moisture, and the decomposing wood continually feeds the soils in the bed. This is some information I got from University of Maryland lawn alternatives that really stood out to me. They said, your yard is your private space, but it is also part of the world. What you put there matters. By replacing turf grass, you can, without too much trouble, foster a healthier watershed and ecosystem as you create beautiful, enjoyable, wildlife-friendly yards that require less maintenance, water, and chemicals. This is something, or a podcast that Nancy Berlin shared with me. The title of the podcast is Garden DC, and she's the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. And in this episode, she talks a little bit about low maintenance lawns. So when if you decide to download it, it starts at the 1 hour and 4 minute mark. You might consider replacing turf for something easier, more attractive, and earth friendly. Maintaining turf can definitely be expensive and very time consuming, as there's constant mowing, watering, reseeding, aerating, weeding, fertilizing, and edging. This eats up resources and can be harsh on the environment. You may consider expanding your planting beds, adding perennials, annuals, bulbs, ornamental trees, and shrubs. And if you have any questions about landscaping, turf, insects, disease, or wildlife, please reach out to our Extension Horticulture Help Desk at mastergardener@pwcgov.org. There are some upcoming Virginia Cooperative Extension Zoom classes on Wednesdays, and they're always from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. August 26th, planting and caring for trees. September 2nd is planting fall bulbs. September 9th, there's no class. September 16th, fall vegetable gardening. September 30th, the Eastern Bluebird, getting started, getting them to stay. October 28th, selecting resilient trees for urban areas. And these classes are free. However, please register by emailing themastergardener@pwc.org. All of our previous Wednesday classes have been posted on our Virginia Cooperative Extension YouTube page. If you're on Facebook, you can check out our VCE Master Gardener Facebook page. And if you enjoyed this video, let us know with your questions, comments, and suggestions for other classes and videos. And again, if you have any questions or want more information on lawns and gardens, you can contact the Extension Horticulture Help Desk at mastergardener@pwcgov.org. And there are some links below to our Virginia Cooperative Extension Prince William unit.
So we've got some questions.
Yes.
The first one had to do with killing grass, and if you don't mind, I'll answer that real quick.
Go ahead.
One of our participants was asking about how do they kill grass. It's getting into their natives. The easiest way is to go ahead and lay down thick cardboard, put some mulch over it. In time, that will kill it, assuming you don't want to use chemicals, because Roundup works too. But the one thing to be cautious about that is that weed seed will blow in, and eventually you'll start to see weeds in that mulched area. So you do have to do a little maintenance, but usually it's a season or two before that really becomes a problem.
I've used a few layers of newspaper and I still have weeds that come through. So I still have to go out and cover them back up again or pull them out.
Where can I get moss, and how can I move out vines? Well, I'm not sure what vines they're referring to, but where can you get moss? I would say garden centers, not like the box stores. Merrifield, Meadows, those kinds of places. Those are usually your best places for moss. We had a question, which we answered in the chat, about sedges on slopes. They work fine on slopes. You don't have to mow them, so that's helpful. Just pick a sedge that doesn't require moist soil. I have a lot of weeds that look like a strawberry plant. What ground cover will take over the strawberry plant? Yeah, that's a good one. Natalie, you want to take a stab at that, and then I can answer that?
Isn't there a native strawberry?
There is.
The wild strawberry.
Actually, that can be really aggressive. And so the thing is with the wild strawberry that it's really hard to get rid of. And when you think you've gotten rid of it, it still can come back. Probably if you've got a large area and there aren't plants within it that you want to save, a lot of times doing the cardboard and mulch thing is the way to go. You can hand pull them, which I've done, and it's painstaking, especially when you've got a neighbor who they're just going to spread back into. Strawberries are difficult to deal with to get out of your lawn. You really don't have to do much to encourage them if they are in your lawn to take over. Cutting your grass low is probably the best thing to encourage them. Where can we get a site visit from Best Lawns, and how do we get rid of the lawn and plant a slope? The first one's easy. The other is a little bit more challenging. Best
If you're
Lawns,
interested,
go ahead, Natalie.
so I manage the Best Lawns program. If you're interested, I can give you I can type my email address in the chat box, and then I can give you some information about Best Lawns and the process moving forward.
And just as a point of reference, the lawn programs in Virginia, well, first of all, if you're outside of Virginia, I have no idea what particular lawn programs you may have locally. If you are in Virginia, the lawn programs are done county by county. We have one here in Prince William. Most of the Northern Virginia counties also have some form of it. If you're not in Prince William but need to find one here in Virginia, just send us an email and we can hook you up. As far as how do I get rid of a lawn and plant on a slope, very carefully is really the best option. Slopes are really difficult because, you know, killing them, you kill everything off on the slope, and all of a sudden the soil becomes unstable, it's subject to erosion, and so a lot of times your best option is to do it in stages. Kill off part of the lawn, put in plants, then go to the lower part of the slope, kill that part off, put in more plants, do it in strips. That's the best way to save erosion-wise, depending on how steep it is. If it's really steep, the steeper it is, the harder it's going to be to replant it and to kill whatever is on there. Where can I get seeds for Dutch clover? The two places, well, you can get them online. And then the one place I know locally, and again, I'm speaking in terms of where we are here in Virginia, Southern States Cooperative. Most of the Southern States cooperatives will have Dutch clover, depending on your local branch, depends on what size you can get it. But here in Manassas, you can get a 3-pound bag for under 20 bucks, and that 3-pound bag will cover an awful lot. The seeding rate for Dutch clover is 4 ounces per 1,000 square feet. No, a 3-pound bag will go pretty far for you. How do you get rid of Japanese stiltgrass? The short answer is that it's a long process. Typically 5 years or more to fully get rid of it because it produces so many seeds. You can use crabgrass pre-emergent in early March, and again, I'm talking for Northern Virginia, and that will suppress a lot of the seed, but not all of it. And then you can hand pull what comes up, or there are weed grass killers that are effective on it. But the big problem with stiltgrass is if it's already flowered and put down seeds, even for one season, you've got a lot of seeds in the soil that eventually are going to germinate. The other issue is stiltgrass got to your yard somehow. And whether it was a bird or whether it washed in with runoff or whether it spread from your neighbors, you've got to kind of pinpoint that source. And if it's a neighbor that has stiltgrass that's coming onto your property, you have to work with that neighbor, because if you're controlling your stiltgrass and they're not, it's still going to come over. Recommendations for sandy, shady environment. Natalie, can you bring up the watermark chart? Any of these sedges that do well in dry conditions should be good for sandy, especially if it's a sandy area that gets flooded from time to time. Most of our ground covers will do okay in sandy situations. Anything that's shade tolerant, I would suggest before you plant it, you incorporate a lot of organic matter, generally compost. And that's probably a good way to improve water retention and get the biology in that soil working a little bit better for you. Next question is about muley grass. Can that be grown by seed? The short answer is yes. I'm not sure what the germination rate of muley grass is, and so it might be difficult to get enough viable seed to grow it the way you want it to. A lot of times it's easier just to get a small muhly grass plant from a nursery, but you can grow it from seed. Next question is, I have a creeping vine that comes from the hill behind my house that keeps getting into the yard. I would say send us a picture and we can identify it and we can give you some control recommendations.
And that email again is mastergardener@pwcgov.org.
Is yellow nutsedge a reliable turf alternative? I would argue no. And the reason I say that is that, so unlike some of our perennial sedges, the way that nutsedge works, it's basically an annual. It's an annual, no, I take that back. It is perennial, but it acts like an annual because it dies back to the ground and it has a very shallow root system and it resprouts from the tubers it leaves in the ground. So if you had a field of yellow nutsedge, winter hits, now you have a field of bare ground. And so I would not use yellow nutsedge as the sole turf alternative. If it was mixed with other sedges, it should be fine. See, what pH does Pennsylvania sedge require? I wonder whether it needs a lower pH. So if your pH is at 7.2, 7.3, not a lot of things really like that pH. So that could be part of the issue. If you get a soil test from a lab, they should be able to tell you how much sulfur to add to lower the pH. Most sedges like mid-5s to mid-6s as far as pH. Another question about stiltgrass. What's the best way to get rid of stiltgrass? Again, it's going to take repeated applications of crabgrass preventer in the spring and hand pulling as the season goes, or using an herbicide as the season goes. Does mowing help Japanese stiltgrass before blooming? Or does mowing Japanese stiltgrass before mowing help? Yes and no. So basically, if you're going to mow Japanese stiltgrass, you want to wait until it's just about the flower spike has come up and its flower is very similar to a crabgrass flower. That's when you want to mow it. And you want to mow it as short as you can because it's going to put a whole lot more energy into trying to, one, reestablish its leaf cover, and two, then put up a flower spike. And hopefully by then it will be wintertime and it will kill it with frost before it can actually flower again. So another question is, I have zoysia here in Zone 6, Rhode Island. Can I interplant bulbs or a native ground cover, or is zoysia too aggressive? Wow, I'm surprised that you have zoysia in Zone 6. So zoysia is a warm season grass. It's not terribly aggressive. And you should be able to plant bulbs in it. For those, just in general, in any kind of lawn, you can actually interplant them with bulbs. The trick is those bulbs need to flower and then die back before you're ready for your first mowing. And so with zoysia, actually that should be really easy. With our fescue lawns down here in Virginia, that's a little bit more tricky sometimes, depending on the weather, but that can be done. I'm not sure what ground covers, what native ground covers you could interplant with zoysia that would work really well. Because over time, I think zoysia will overtake it, but it'll be a slow process. Next question, do you have a picture of a lawn that has just Dutch clover in it?
I don't, but
I want to think I do somewhere, but I'm not sure where. Probably good. The nice thing about Dutch clover is you really don't have to mow it unless you really want to, but you do have to be careful of the whole monoculture thing. And also the other thing about Dutch clover to keep in mind, if you have kids, when Dutch clover is wet, it's very slippery. And so you don't want kids playing on all Dutch clover. Where can I plant in a small space, or what can I plant in a small space under crepe myrtle trees? That's a good question. I think you're probably, and Natalie, you can jump in on this too. I think you're probably better off just mulching it if it's a small crepe myrtle. Some of the larger crepe myrtles where there's more sun access, most of the shade tolerant ground covers should work okay. See, is there an effective way to control yellow nut sedge? So yellow nut sedge is an interesting sedge because most sedges typically prefer wet conditions. Nut sedge can outcompete fescue in hot, dry situations. And so even like this summer where we had terrible drought, nut sedge went nuts. The tricky bit with nut sedge is that you've got to get it early. After about the 5th leaf that it puts on, nut sedge has formed tubers that are big enough to resprout from. So you want to hand pull or use a sedgicide, which is an herbicide specifically targeted towards sedges, when the plant is young, and that way it won't resprout. Otherwise, it's going to take some repeated attempts. And when you hand pull, the nut sedges are designed so that the tubers will break off from the roots, and so you may get the plant, but you won't get the tuber, and it'll just resprout. My backyard has a fairly large decline. Husband is terraced. Some of the areas with stone wall, a wide strip of grass between the wall and the low wall of bushes in a moist area. What can I put between the wall and the enclosed area that is easy to maintain? No grass will grow there for any period of time. I think it kind of depends on exactly how much shade, but it sounds like this is a really deep shade situation. And with super deep shade, I would argue you're probably not going to get anything to grow there. Depends on the soil, depends on the compaction, the pH, and all those sorts of things. You might have a hard time finding something that's going to grow there and look nice. And so that might be a case for, as Natalie showed earlier, some of the permeable landscaping, whether that's stone or gravel paths or heavily mulched area. That might be your best option. Can you think of anything, Natalie, that might fit that situation?
Yeah, I agree with the dry creek bed or the permeable landscaping.
Let's see, our next question is dichondra really a plausible ground cover? It can be. I would suggest that dichondra is probably better in a mixed planting than a single planting. Dichondra work, typically you'll see it with wild violet because it's a little bit more shade tolerant. But again, monoculture in general is bad. So I think if you blended it with some other natives, it would be okay. Any suggestions for replacing turf on a budget? Any cost share reimbursement opportunities? So Ryan, that really depends on where you are, if there's cost share available. And for those of you who don't know, cost share is one of those things. It's usually a state program where you pay to put in a best management practice and you get reimbursed for part of it. They do some urban cost shares here in Virginia, but that depends state to state. But Ryan, if you send us an email, we can get you details, figure out where you are, and see if there's any opportunities there for you.
I say starting small too. Like it can be overwhelming, but I started small and just to not overwhelm myself, but I'm pretty happy with the progress that all my plants have made. So even though it's a small area. So.
Yeah, that's true, because the upfront cost of converting turf into ground covers is relatively high, but the long-term savings kind of balance that out. And starting small is your best option, especially if you have a large lawn to convert. Will ferns survive on a shady slope where there is still grass? Depends. Ferns do okay on slopes. The biggest problem I would think with ferns would, first of all, be shade, and the second one would be if the grass gets too high, if you have to go and mow the grass, you're going to hurt the ferns. Did you say that green and gold can grow in the shade?
I will go back to the PowerPoint.
I'm trying to remember. I
Full
think
sun
it's
to
got
part
sunshade.
shade.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It's a part shade plant. Is yellow nut sage considered invasive? Is there really a need to control it? I'm not necessarily sure if it's considered invasive. Controlling it is really up to you. I mean, I have nutsedge in my yard, and it's one of those things where, to me, it's not really worth the hassle. The disadvantage of having nutsedge in your yard is that typically it's a lighter shade of green than your turf grass, and typically it grows faster, so it's taller, and so it may make your lawn look a little unkept. But really, it depends on your weed tolerance. And remember, a weed is just a plant that is someplace where you don't want it to be. Next question. My neighbor has several black walnut trees close to our yard. Which plants will tolerate black walnut? That's a good question. One of Nancy Berlin's presentations earlier this summer spoke a little bit about some of the natives she was talking about, or ground covers. I can't remember which, and I can't remember specifically what plant she was talking about does well under black walnut. Rather than guess at what that is, Sarah, if you just send us an email, we'll check with Nancy and get back to you. Would it not be recommended to seed on a slope, danger being getting carried away with the rain? So seeding on a slope is a tricky business. And when we talk about seeding on a slope, typically what happens is you will prepare the ground, you'll seed, and then you'll cover it. They make these mats, these straw mats that are designed to biodegrade after a while, that are used to hold seed down until they germinate on the slope. That's one option. The other option is hydro seeding, which is a much more expensive option, but you see that in construction on slopes quite a bit. But I would suggest using those straw mats. There's a comment about plants being installed wider than recommended to save costs. You'll remember typically with our perennials, the first year they're installed, they sleep. The second year they creep, and the third year they leap. And so you can space out perennials a little bit wider. It's just more keeping up with the weeds between them. But that is a good way to save costs. Thank you for that, Maggie. Diane also added that to save costs, there are a number of online plant nurseries that will sell plug trays in quantities of 32, 50, or 72. Plug trays, for those of you who don't know, are basically very small plants. You get them in a typical tray like you would see if you were going to buy plant starts at a garden center. And that is a much more cost-effective way than buying bigger, more mature plants in quantity. So Jenny added the comment, black walnut-resistant perennials include heuchera, and I think heuchera was the one that Nancy was talking about,
Okay.
geranium, hosta, and some phlox and trillium. So there are things that will grow under black walnuts. It's not a plant with a desert underneath it. There are things that have evolved to work with black walnuts, so there are options. And that looks like our last question/comment. Well, thank you all for joining us. We hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
And if you think of any other questions, again, send us an email. We'll be happy to answer those questions. Or if we didn't answer anything completely and you need some follow-up, let us know. Next week, Jan Rice, one of our Master Gardener volunteers, will be talking about planting and caring for trees. And we hope to see you then.
Thank you, everybody.